Okay, so now we're going to talk about for next loops. They're another loop structure, and they're more straightforward than the other ones, I think. To do this, I am going to add a worksheet here, and I'm going to call it for next loops. And I'm going to go to the editor, and in my loops module here, I'm going to write a subroutine called sub test for next. And what I want to do is I want to copy this again, this little bit of code here. I want to select the right sheet, and I want to clear its context, so I'm going to for next loops. I'm going to select the sheet I just named and clear its contents. And then what I'm going to do is write a for next loop, which all a for next loop does is loop through a range of numbers. Loop through a range of numbers, and it looks like this. It loops through a range of numbers, so the number of times you are going to run code depends on the range of numbers you select. So it looks like this. For I equal to 0 to 10, next I. That's a for next loop. And what I should do really is declare dim I as long. So I have a variable here, and this variable I is the counter variable that changes every time through the loop. And it changes when it gets to this line, next I. So the first line, all it does is say, set your counter variable equal to some number, some initial number. And in this case, my initial number is 1. So the first time through the loop, I is going to be 1. And then set the range that this counter variable is going to go to. Well, it's going to start at 1, and it's going to go until 10. And what's going to make it move from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 all the way to 10 is this next keyword right here. And then you put the name of the variable again, next I. So this is the initial value of your counter variable, and the next is going to increment that value until it reaches the range that you put in here. I shouldn't say the range, the highest index that you have here. Maybe not highest index is the right way to say it. The limit of this for next loop counter variable. It's 10. So we can see this by just doing something. We can see how this works by just doing something like this. What I'm going to do is range a1 dot value. No, I'll do something like this. Cells I, comma 1 dot value is equal to I. And what this is going to do is put whatever our I variable has in it into cell 1, column 1. And next time through, it's going to do cell 2, column 2, etc. So let's run this. First, let's step through it actually. So I put a breakpoint there. Notice I is set to 0 until it gets to this line. And then if I step through, I is equal to 1. Now it's going to take that value 1 and put it in cells 1, comma 1 dot value. And there it is. There's cell 1, comma 1, and its value is now 1. And now this next I, watch this, makes I go from 1 down here to 2. So right there went from 1 to 2. And you immediately are back in the code, and you're just cells 2, comma 1 is now going to be equal to 2. So if I run this, there's 2. And can see I is 2, and now when I step through, I is going to be 3, and there's I is 3. And so if you run this, let me just remove the breakpoint. I've inserted values in cell, A1, A2, A3, A4, A5, A6. So I'm moving down the row because I have a variable here for the row. And the number is changing because I is just looping from the initial value to the ending value, from 1 to 10. Now, the cool thing about this is that, it's very simple. It's simpler than the do while because there's no conditions. I'm not checking any conditions like we saw in the do while and do until. There were conditions that we were checking. Here, I'm not checking any conditions. I just am looping, a set number of times. In this case, I looped 10 times. I could change this to 0, and I could run this. Oops, actually, I can't change it to 0 because I can't have a row that is 0. Rows start at 1 here. But what I can do is just do this, I plus 1, and I just want to show you what will happen if I do that. If I run it, now I started 0, and the value I put into cell A1 is 0 because the first time through the loop I is set to 0, so this would be 0, and since I is set to 0, 0 plus 1 is 1, so in cell 1, 1 I put the value 0, and I loop 11 times. So you could change the range you could change how many times you're going to loop. You could start at 1 or you could start at 0. You could go up to 50 or 150. This is a very simple loop. It's just saying I want to loop X number of times. 100 times, 10 times, 50 times. And if you run it, there you see you're going to loop that many times. Let me remove this plus 1 because I want to show you that by default this next I increments by 1, but you can change it. So let's say I want to go from 1 to 20, but I want to go in 2, so I could go step 2. If I do this step, this is a keyword. This is a keyword that will, instead of incrementing by 1, it'll increment by 2. So if I run this now I see 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 10, all the way down to 19. Because what it did is start at 1, and you put 1 in cell 1, 1. But then when it went to the next, here we could step through it. When it gets to this line, it just put 1 in cell A1. Now when I do this, I went from 1 to 3 because of the step 2. So now I is equal to 3, and now it puts 3 in cell A3, row 3, column 1. And then again, it's going to add 2, and I is going to become 5. So this step sort of controls what the increment of your variable here, of your counter variable. And you can also step backwards. So you could do something like this. For I equal to 20 to 1, step -2, you could do step -2. You could run it like this, and the first time through the loop, look what happens. If we get 2, 4, 6, 8 going on to 20, but look what happens here. If you run this, the first time through the loop, I is 20. So in cell row 20, column 1, that's down here, I'm going to put the value I. So there you see the 20 in row 20, column 1. And then what happens is you move up. So now I is 18 because I'm stepping negative. I went from 20, and then I subtract 2, so now I is 18. So now I am in row 18, column 1, and I put I, which is 18. So the step keyword controls, do you want to increment just by 1, or do you want to increment by 10 or by 5? And then you could change your initial value if you wanted to step backwards or step forwards. Usually 99% of the time you're going to do something like this, from 1 to 100, and then you're probably not going to have a step, and you're just going to run some code that loops 100 times or something like that. And it's the same thing. So that's all this loop structure does. You know, in the do until and do while, we had conditions that we were checking, and the loop would stop depending on those conditions, right? But here, you're not checking any conditions. You're just saying, I want to loop 100 times. I want to do this. I want to do some code 100 times or 1,000,000 times or something like that. In the next video, I'll go through an example, practical example of using this for next loop.